Question 1. Cost-benefit analysis shows that the Hereford Driving School can significantly reduce its operational expenses by adopting a new training methodology. Considering the regulatory framework and ethical obligations in the UK, which approach to process optimization would best serve the school's long-term interests and its commitment to producing safe, competent drivers? Option A. Implement a new, proven training software that offers a lower licensing fee, without a comprehensive evaluation of its pedagogical effectiveness or alignment with DVSA standards. Option B. Conduct a thorough review of the current training curriculum and materials to identify areas for efficiency improvements that do not compromise training quality or safety, consulting with experienced instructors and DVSA guidance, and piloting any proposed changes. Option C. Adopt a condensed training schedule that reduces the number of practical driving hours to lower operational costs. Option D. Focus exclusively on theoretical knowledge delivery through online modules, significantly reducing in-car practical training. Correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough review of the current training curriculum and materials to identify areas for efficiency improvements that do not compromise training quality or safety, consulting with experienced instructors and DVSA guidance, and piloting any proposed changes. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for cost savings with the long-term implications for driver safety and the reputation of the Hereford Driving School. A hasty decision based solely on cost could lead to compromised training quality, increased accident rates, and potential regulatory scrutiny from the DVSA, Driver and Vehicle Standards Agency. In the UK, careful judgment is required to ensure that any process optimization aligns with regulatory requirements and ethical obligations to produce competent and safe drivers. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a comprehensive review of the existing training curriculum and materials to identify areas where efficiency can be improved without sacrificing quality or safety. This includes evaluating the effectiveness of current teaching methods, the relevance of theoretical content, and the practical application of skills. The Hereford Driving School should consult with experienced instructors and potentially review DVSA guidance on best practices for driver education. Any proposed changes must be piloted and assessed for their impact on student learning outcomes and pass rates before full implementation. This approach prioritizes the core mission of producing safe drivers, which is paramount under UK road safety regulations, and the ethical duty of care owed to students and the public. Incorrect approaches analysis. Implementing a new, unproven training software solely based on its lower licensing cost, without a thorough evaluation of its pedagogical effectiveness or its alignment with DVSA standards, is professionally unacceptable. This approach prioritizes cost over the quality of instruction and student learning, potentially leading to gaps in essential knowledge and skills, which could result in higher failure rates and increased risks on the road. This directly contravenes the ethical obligation to provide effective training and the implicit requirement to adhere to standards that promote road safety. Adopting a condensed training schedule that reduces the number of practical driving hours, even if it lowers operational costs, is also professionally unacceptable. The DVSA mandates a certain level of proficiency that is typically achieved through sufficient practical experience. Shortening this essential component risks producing drivers who are not adequately prepared for real-world driving conditions, thereby compromising safety and potentially violating regulatory expectations for driver competency. Focusing exclusively on theoretical knowledge delivery through online modules, while significantly reducing in-car practical training, is professionally unacceptable. While theory is important, the core of driver training lies in the development of practical skills, hazard perception, and decision-making in dynamic driving environments. Neglecting practical application undermines the fundamental purpose of driver education and fails to meet the competency requirements set by regulatory bodies. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with clearly defining the objectives, which in this case are to optimize processes while maintaining or improving driver safety and training quality. This should be followed by gathering information about current processes, identifying potential areas for improvement, and then evaluating various options against established criteria, including regulatory compliance, ethical considerations, and impact on key performance indicators, e.g., Student success rates, accident data. A thorough risk assessment should be conducted for each potential change, and pilot testing should be utilized to validate proposed solutions before widespread adoption. Continuous monitoring and evaluation are essential to ensure ongoing effectiveness and compliance. Question 2. Process analysis reveals that during a Hereford driver's test, an applicant encounters a busy intersection with multiple lanes of traffic and pedestrians. What approach best demonstrates adherence to the principles of safe driving as outlined by the Hereford Provincial Highway Safety Act? Option A. Attempting to complete the maneuvers as quickly as possible to impress the examiner with efficiency. Option B. Actively scanning the intersection for potential hazards, anticipating the movements of other vehicles and pedestrians, and adjusting speed and position accordingly to maintain a safe buffer. Option C. Driving at a minimal speed to avoid any potential mistakes, even if it causes minor disruptions to traffic flow. Option D. Strictly following the examiner's instructions for lane changes and turns without paying significant attention to other road users. The correct answer is B. Actively scanning the intersection for potential hazards, anticipating the movements of other vehicles and pedestrians, and adjusting speed and position accordingly to maintain a safe buffer. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Hereford driver applicant due to the inherent risks associated with operating a vehicle on public roads and the paramount importance of public safety. The applicant must demonstrate not only proficiency in vehicle control, but also a thorough understanding of traffic laws and safe driving practices, as mandated by the Hereford Provincial Highway Safety Act. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all actions taken during the test reflect a commitment to these principles, as any deviation could compromise the safety of the applicant, the examiner, and other road users. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves the applicant proactively identifying and addressing potential hazards by scanning the environment and anticipating the actions of other road users. This approach aligns directly with the core principles of defensive driving, which are implicitly and explicitly tested during the Hereford driver's test. Specifically, the Hereford Provincial Highway Safety Act emphasizes the driver's responsibility to maintain a safe distance, observe traffic signals and signs, and yield when necessary to prevent collisions. By actively scanning and anticipating, the applicant demonstrates an understanding of these duties and a commitment to proactive safety, which is the benchmark for a competent driver. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves focusing solely on executing the examiner's instructions without considering the broader traffic context. This demonstrates a lack of situational awareness and fails to meet the proactive safety expectations of the Hereford Provincial Highway Safety Act. It suggests the applicant is merely following a checklist rather than applying safe driving principles in a dynamic environment. Another incorrect approach is to prioritize speed and efficiency over safety. This is a direct contravention of the Act's emphasis on safe operation and could lead to dangerous situations, such as exceeding speed limits or failing to yield appropriately. Such an approach indicates a misunderstanding of the fundamental purpose of the driving test, which is to ensure safe operation, not rapid completion. A further incorrect approach is to exhibit nervousness and hesitation to the point of impeding traffic flow or creating uncertainty for other road users. While some nervousness is understandable, excessive hesitation can itself become a hazard, disrupting the predictable flow of traffic and potentially causing other drivers to make unsafe maneuvers. The Hereford Provincial Highway Safety Act implicitly requires drivers to operate their vehicles with a reasonable degree of confidence and decisiveness, while always prioritizing safety. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach driving tests with a mindset of demonstrating safe and responsible operation, not just technical skill. This involves a continuous assessment of the environment, anticipation of potential risks, and adherence to all traffic laws and regulations. The decision-making process should prioritize safety above all else, followed by compliance with legal requirements, and then efficient and smooth operation. If faced with a situation where an instruction might compromise safety, a professional would prioritize safety and communicate their reasoning to the examiner. Question 3. Quality control measures reveal that a driving instructor in Ontario, Canada, is being pressured by a student to book their G2 road test despite the student consistently struggling with proper speed control and maintaining lane discipline during practice sessions. Which of the following actions best upholds the instructor's professional and regulatory obligations? Option A. Advise the student that they are not yet ready for the road test and continue to provide targeted practice in speed control and lane discipline until consistent improvement is demonstrated. Option B. Book the road test as requested, but provide the student with extensive last-minute coaching during the test itself to compensate for their weaknesses. Option C. Agree to book the road test, but inform the student that they will likely fail due to their current skill level. Option D. Proceed with booking the road test, assuming the examiner will identify and address any deficiencies during the official evaluation. Correct answer is A. Advise the student that they are not yet ready for the road test and continue to provide targeted practice in speed control and lane discipline until consistent improvement is demonstrated. Explanation. The scenario presents a challenge for a driving instructor in Ontario, Canada, who is responsible for ensuring their students are not only proficient in driving, but also adhere to the legal requirements for obtaining a driver's license. The core professional challenge lies in balancing the student's eagerness to pass with the instructor's ethical and legal obligation to certify competence, not just a willingness to attempt the test. This requires careful judgment to avoid misrepresenting a student's readiness, which could have serious consequences for public safety and the integrity of the licensing process. The best approach involves a thorough and objective assessment of the student's driving skills against the standards set by the Ontario Ministry of Transportation, MTO, for the G2 or G road test. This means ensuring the student can consistently demonstrate all required maneuvers, adhere to traffic laws, and exhibit safe driving habits without prompting or significant intervention from the instructor. The instructor must be confident that the student's performance is reliable and safe under typical driving conditions, not just a one-off good performance. This aligns with the MTO's mandate to license safe drivers and upholds the professional responsibility of the instructor to act in the public interest. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the test if the student is demonstrably struggling with key components, such as lane changes, parallel parking, or speed control, even if they express strong confidence or the instructor feels pressured. This fails to meet the MTO's standards for safe driving and could lead to the student failing the test, or worse, passing with a deficiency that compromises road safety. Another incorrect approach is to focus solely on the student's desire to pass, overlooking critical safety aspects. This prioritizes the student's immediate goal over the broader responsibility to ensure competent and safe driving, which is a violation of professional ethics and the spirit of the licensing regulations. Finally, attempting to coach the student through the test in real time, beyond what is permissible during a road test, would also be an unacceptable approach. This undermines the purpose of the test, which is to assess independent driving ability, and could be seen as an attempt to circumvent the evaluation process. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes objective assessment against established standards, ethical considerations of public safety, and regulatory compliance. This involves setting clear expectations with students about what constitutes readiness for a road test, conducting practice tests that simulate the actual examination, and making an informed decision based on consistent performance rather than subjective feelings or external pressure. Question 4. The monitoring system demonstrates an amber warning light indicating a potential issue with the vehicle's braking system. You are currently driving on Highway 401 in Ontario, approaching a busy interchange. What is the most appropriate and legally compliant course of action according to Ontario regulations? Option A. Safely pull over to the shoulder of the highway at the earliest safe opportunity to assess the warning light and the vehicle's braking performance. Option B. Continue driving to your destination, assuming the light is a minor fault and the brakes are still functional enough for normal driving. Option C. Immediately attempt to find the nearest mechanic while continuing to drive, hoping to reach them quickly. Option D. Ignore the warning light and continue driving, believing it might be a sensor malfunction that will resolve itself. The correct answer is A. Safely pull over to the shoulder of the highway at the earliest safe opportunity to assess the warning light and the vehicle's braking performance. Explanation. The monitoring system demonstrates a proactive approach to identifying potential issues before they escalate. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the driver to interpret system feedback accurately and respond appropriately under pressure, balancing immediate operational needs with safety regulations. The driver must exercise sound judgment to determine the severity of the alert and the necessary course of action, ensuring compliance with the Ontario Highway Traffic Act and its associated regulations. The best approach involves immediately and safely pulling over to a safe location to investigate the warning light. This aligns with the Ontario Highway Traffic Act's emphasis on ensuring a vehicle is in a safe operating condition before continuing a journey. By stopping, the driver can assess the situation without compromising the safety of themselves, other road users, or the vehicle. This action demonstrates a commitment to regulatory compliance and responsible vehicle operation, prioritizing safety over expediency. Failing to acknowledge the warning light and continuing to drive, even if the vehicle appears to be functioning normally, is a significant regulatory failure. The Ontario Highway Traffic Act implicitly requires drivers to maintain their vehicles in a safe condition. Ignoring a warning light suggests a disregard for potential mechanical failures that could lead to an accident or further damage, violating the spirit and letter of safe driving practices. Another incorrect approach is to immediately seek a mechanic without first safely stopping and assessing the situation. While seeking professional help is important, doing so while still in motion, especially if the warning light indicates a critical issue, poses an immediate safety risk. This approach prioritizes a solution over immediate safety and regulatory compliance. Finally, attempting to drive through the warning light with the hope that it will resolve itself is a dangerous and unprofessional response. This demonstrates a lack of understanding of vehicle warning systems and a disregard for potential safety hazards. It directly contravenes the expectation that drivers will take all reasonable steps to ensure their vehicle is safe to operate. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety and regulatory compliance. This involves 1. Recognizing and understanding warning signals. 2. Assessing the immediate risk associated with the signal. 3. Taking immediate safe action to mitigate risk e.g. pulling over. 4. Consulting relevant regulations and seeking appropriate professional assistance if necessary. Question 5. During the evaluation of a driving school's process for preparing students for the Hereford driving test, which approach best optimizes the learning experience while ensuring adherence to the specific requirements of the test syllabus and promoting road safety? Option A. Prioritizing the practice of individual Hereford driving test maneuvers in isolation, without integrating them into varied real-world driving scenarios. Option B. Implementing a phased learning program where students progress through modules aligned with the Hereford driving test syllabus, with regular instructor assessments and targeted practice to address identified skill gaps before advancing. Option C. Adopting a system where feedback and correction of errors are primarily provided only during scheduled mock tests, rather than through continuous observation and guidance. Option D. Focusing on completing a predetermined number of driving lessons for each student, regardless of their demonstrated proficiency in specific areas of the Hereford driving test syllabus. The correct answer is B. Implementing a phased learning program where students progress through modules aligned with the Hereford driving test syllabus, with regular instructor assessments and targeted practice to address identified skill gaps before advancing. Explanation. During the evaluation of a driving school's operational efficiency in Hereford, a key challenge arises from balancing the need for timely student progress with ensuring comprehensive skill development and adherence to the Hereford driving test standards. This scenario demands careful judgment to avoid compromising safety or the integrity of the learning process for the sake of speed. The most effective approach involves a structured, multi-stage feedback and assessment system that aligns directly with the Hereford driving test syllabus. This method prioritizes identifying and addressing individual learning gaps through targeted practice and instructor observation before progressing to more complex maneuvers. It ensures that each student masters foundational skills and understands the specific criteria evaluated in the official test, thereby optimizing their preparation and increasing their likelihood of success. This aligns with the ethical obligation to provide competent instruction and the regulatory requirement to prepare drivers to a safe standard as defined by the Hereford driving test framework. An alternative approach that focuses solely on the number of lessons completed per student, without regard to demonstrated competency against the Hereford driving test syllabus, is professionally unacceptable. This method risks promoting students who have not fully grasped essential skills, potentially leading to unsafe driving practices and a higher failure rate on the official test. It fails to meet the ethical duty of care to the student and the regulatory expectation of thorough preparation. Another less effective strategy is to prioritize the completion of specific test maneuvers in isolation, without integrating them into real-world driving scenarios. While these maneuvers are part of the Hereford driving test, their isolated practice can lead to a superficial understanding and an inability to apply them safely and appropriately in varied traffic conditions. This approach neglects the broader objective of developing a safe and confident driver, which is the ultimate goal of the licensing process. Finally, a reactive approach that only addresses errors when they occur during mock tests, without proactive identification and correction, is also problematic. This method delays learning and can lead to the reinforcement of bad habits. It is less efficient than a system that continuously monitors progress and provides immediate, constructive feedback aligned with the Hereford driving test requirements. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the specific requirements of the Hereford driving test syllabus. This should be followed by an assessment of the student's current skill level, the development of a personalized learning plan that addresses identified gaps, and continuous monitoring and feedback against the established standards. The ultimate goal is to ensure the student is not only prepared for the test, but is also a safe and competent driver. Question 6. What factors determine the most appropriate driving speed when approaching a blind curve on a rural road in Ontario, considering the need for timely arrival as scheduled appointment? Option A. Braking sharply only when a hazard is immediately visible, regardless of the speed. Option B. Adjusting speed to ensure full visibility of the road ahead and maintaining vehicle control, even if it means a slight delay. Option C. Maintaining the posted speed limit to ensure timely arrival, assuming the road is clear. Option D. Accelerating to quickly pass the blind curve before any potential hazards appear. The correct answer is B. Adjusting speed to ensure full visibility of the road ahead and maintaining vehicle control, even if it means a slight delay. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a driver to balance adherence to traffic laws with the need to reach a destination promptly, potentially under pressure. The driver must exercise sound judgment to avoid compromising safety or breaking regulations. Careful consideration of the immediate environment and potential consequences is paramount. The best approach involves prioritizing safety and compliance with the Highway Traffic Act of Ontario. This means slowing down to a safe speed that allows for clear visibility and control of the vehicle, even if it means arriving slightly later. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the fundamental principles of road safety enshrined in the Highway Traffic Act, which mandates that drivers operate their vehicles at a speed that is reasonable and prudent for the conditions, and that they maintain proper control. Failing to do so, even with the intention of being timely, can lead to accidents and violations. An incorrect approach would be to maintain a speed that is too fast for the conditions, believing that the destination's urgency justifies the risk. This directly contravenes the Highway Traffic Act's requirement for reasonable and prudent speed and proper control, increasing the likelihood of a collision and potential charges. Another incorrect approach would be to abruptly brake or swerve to avoid a hazard without first assessing the surrounding traffic and road conditions. This demonstrates a lack of situational awareness and control, which is a violation of safe driving practices and the Act's emphasis on maintaining control of the vehicle. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough assessment of the immediate driving environment and prevailing conditions. This includes evaluating visibility, road surface, presence of other vehicles, pedestrians, and potential hazards. Next, they should consider the legal requirements, specifically the speed limits and general duties of care, outlined in the Highway Traffic Act of Ontario. Finally, they should weigh the potential consequences of different actions, prioritizing safety and compliance over perceived urgency. Question 7. Cost-benefit analysis shows a potential for significant savings by adopting a new, unproven system for recording test results at the Hereford Driving Test Center. What is the most responsible course of action for the center manager, considering the regulatory environment of the UK? Option A. Conduct a thorough review of the proposed changes with the senior examiner. Consult relevant DVSA guidance on test center operations and equipment, and implement a pilot study to assess the impact on test validity and candidate experience before full adoption. Option B. Replace the existing recording system with the new one based solely on the vendor's assurances, without further consultation or testing. Option C. Proceed with the new system, informing examiners only after the implementation is complete to minimize disruption. Option D. Immediately implement the new system to realize the cost savings, assuming the vendor's claims about efficiency and accuracy are sufficient. The correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough review of the proposed changes with the senior examiner. Consult relevant DVSA guidance on test center operations and equipment, and implement a pilot study to assess the impact on test validity and candidate experience before full adoption. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for cost savings with the long-term implications for driver safety and public trust. The Hereford Driving Test Centre operates under the strict regulatory framework of the UK's Driver and Vehicle Standards Agency, DVSA. Any decision impacting the testing process must prioritize public safety and adhere to the DVSA standards for assessing driver competence. A failure to do so could lead to unqualified drivers on the road, increased accident rates, and significant reputational damage to the centre and the DVSA. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves a thorough review of the proposed changes by the senior examiner, consulting with DVSA guidance on test center operations and equipment standards, and conducting a pilot study to assess the impact on test validity and candidate experience. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the DVSA mandate to ensure road safety and maintain the integrity of the driving test. DVSA guidelines emphasize the importance of standardized testing conditions and reliable equipment. By seeking expert consultation and piloting the changes, the center demonstrates a commitment to evidence-based decision-making that prioritizes safety and compliance over immediate cost reduction. This proactive and compliant method ensures that any adopted process optimization does not compromise the rigorous standards expected of the driving test. Incorrect approaches analysis. Implementing the new system without consulting DVSA guidance or conducting a pilot study would be a significant regulatory failure. This approach prioritizes cost savings without adequately assessing the potential impact on test fairness and safety, contravening the DVSA core objectives. Replacing existing equipment solely based on a vendor's claims, without independent verification or consideration of DVSA approval for such equipment, is also a failure. This bypasses the necessary due diligence to ensure the equipment meets the required standards for assessing driving competence. Furthermore, proceeding with the changes without informing or training examiners would be an ethical and operational failure, as it undermines the professionalism and competence of the testing staff and could lead to inconsistent test delivery, directly impacting the validity of the driving test. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the regulatory objectives and ethical obligations. In this case, the primary objective is public road safety, governed by DVSA regulations. Any proposed process optimization must be evaluated against these standards. The framework should involve 1. Identifying the problem or opportunity, e.g., cost reduction. 2. Researching relevant regulations and best practices, DVSA guidelines. 3. Evaluating potential solutions against these standards, considering safety, fairness, and efficiency. 4. Consulting with relevant stakeholders and experts, senior examiner, DVSA. 5. Piloting and monitoring the chosen solution to ensure effectiveness and compliance. 6. Documenting the decision-making process and outcomes. Question 8. The control framework reveals that Hereford Driver in Ontario, Canada, is operating a vehicle that begins to emit visible smoke from the engine compartment while on a busy provincial highway. The driver is concerned about reaching their destination, but also recognizes the potential danger. What is the most responsible and legally compliant course of action for the driver to take? Option A. Ignore the smoke and continue driving, assuming it is a minor issue that will resolve itself. Option B. Immediately pull over to the shoulder of the road away from traffic and turn off the engine to assess the situation and call for assistance. Option C. Attempt to diagnose and fix the smoke issue on the side of the road while traffic is still passing by. Option D. Continue driving to the nearest service station, as it is only a few kilometers away, to avoid significant delay. The correct answer is B. Immediately pull over to the shoulder of the road, away from traffic, and turn off the engine to assess the situation and call for assistance. Explanation. The control framework reveals a scenario where a Hereford driver, operating under the regulations of Ontario, Canada, is facing a situation that tests their understanding of road safety principles and their responsibility to other road users. The professional challenge lies in balancing the immediate need to reach a destination with the paramount importance of adhering to traffic laws designed to prevent accidents and protect all individuals on the road. This requires a nuanced judgment that prioritizes safety and legal compliance over personal convenience or perceived urgency. The best professional approach involves immediately ceasing the operation of the vehicle and ensuring it is moved to a safe location off the traveled portion of the roadway. This action directly addresses the immediate hazard posed by the malfunctioning vehicle. This approach is correct because it aligns with the fundamental principles of road safety enshrined in the Ontario Highway Traffic Act, specifically sections pertaining to the operation of unsafe vehicles and the duty of care owed by drivers to prevent hazards. By stopping the vehicle and making it safe, the driver is fulfilling their legal obligation to avoid creating a dangerous situation for themselves and others. This proactive measure demonstrates responsible driver behavior and adherence to the spirit and letter of traffic law. An incorrect approach involves continuing to drive the vehicle to the nearest service station, despite the visible smoke. This is professionally unacceptable, as it knowingly operates a vehicle in a condition that poses a significant risk of fire or mechanical failure, potentially leading to a collision or obstructing traffic. This directly violates the Ontario Highway Traffic Act's provisions regarding the operation of vehicles in an unsafe condition, and demonstrates a disregard for the safety of other road users. Another incorrect approach is to attempt minor repairs on the side of the road without first ensuring the vehicle is safely off the traveled portion of the highway. This is professionally unacceptable because it creates a hazard for passing traffic and potentially exposes the driver to danger from other vehicles. The Ontario Highway Traffic Act emphasizes the importance of driver and vehicle safety, and roadside repairs in active traffic lanes compromise both. A final incorrect approach is to ignore the smoke and continue driving as if nothing is wrong. This is professionally unacceptable, as it represents a willful disregard for obvious mechanical issues that could lead to catastrophic failure, a fire, or a serious accident. This behavior is a direct contravention of the driver's duty of care and the Ontario Highway Traffic Act's requirements for operating a vehicle in a safe and roadworthy condition. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a clear hierarchy of priorities, immediate safety of oneself and others, followed by legal compliance, and then addressing the mechanical issue. Drivers should be trained to recognize potential hazards, err on the side of caution when in doubt about vehicle safety, and understand their legal obligations to report or mitigate dangerous situations on the road. This involves assessing the risk, understanding the relevant traffic laws, and taking the most responsible action to prevent harm. Question 9. The risk matrix shows a high likelihood of a serious accident occurring at the junction of Elm Street and Oak Avenue in Hereford, with a severe consequence if it does. As a driving instructor who has observed this recurring hazard during lessons, what is the most responsible and effective course of action to take according to the principles emphasized in the Hereford driver's test syllabus? Option A. Assume that other drivers are experienced enough to navigate the junction safely and that no further action is necessary. Option B. Erect unofficial warning signs at the junction to alert other drivers to the potential danger. Option C. Record the observation in your personal logbook for future reference but take no immediate external action. Option D. Immediately report the identified high-risk junction to the Hereford City Council's Road Safety and Traffic Management Department, providing detailed evidence of the observed risk. The correct answer is D. Immediately report the identified high-risk junction to the Hereford City Council's Road Safety and Traffic Management Department, providing detailed evidence of the observed risk. Explanation. The risk matrix shows a high likelihood of a serious accident occurring at the junction of Elm Street and Oak Avenue in Hereford, with a severe consequence if it does. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires immediate and decisive action to mitigate a significant public safety risk, balancing the urgency of the situation with the need for proper procedure and resource allocation. The Hereford driver's test syllabus emphasizes proactive hazard identification and risk management, particularly concerning road safety. The best approach involves immediately escalating the identified high-risk junction to the relevant Hereford City Council department, responsible for road safety and traffic management, providing detailed evidence of the observed risk. This aligns with the syllabus's emphasis on reporting and addressing potential hazards to prevent accidents. The regulatory framework for road safety in the UK, as reflected in the principles of the Hereford driver's test, mandates that individuals and authorities take reasonable steps to prevent foreseeable harm. Reporting such a significant risk to the appropriate body is a direct fulfillment of this duty, ensuring that professional engineers or traffic planners can assess and implement necessary safety improvements, such as traffic calming measures or improved signage. An incorrect approach would be to simply record the observation in a personal logbook without further action. This fails to address the immediate public safety risk and neglects the professional and ethical obligation to report significant hazards that could lead to harm. It demonstrates a lack of proactive risk management, a core component of the Hereford driver's test syllabus. Another incorrect approach would be to attempt to implement personal, ad hoc safety measures at the junction without proper authority or expertise. This could include placing unofficial warning signs or barriers. Such actions could be ineffective, create new hazards, or even contravene local bylaws and traffic regulations, potentially leading to liability for the individual and failing to address the root cause of the risk. This bypasses the established channels for road safety improvements, which are designed to ensure that interventions are evidence-based and professionally implemented. A further incorrect approach would be to dismiss the observation as minor, assuming that other road users will manage the risk. This demonstrates a failure to understand the severity of the potential consequences and a disregard for the proactive hazard identification principles taught in the Hereford driver's test. It prioritizes convenience over safety and fails to uphold the duty of care expected of anyone operating within the road transport ecosystem. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety and adherence to established procedures. This involves 1. Identifying the hazard and assessing its potential risk, likelihood, and severity. 2. Determining the appropriate reporting channels and stakeholders responsible for addressing the hazard. 3. Escalating the issue with clear, evidence-based information. 4. Following up to ensure appropriate action is taken. 5. Documenting all actions and communications. Question 10. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a Hereford driving school in Ontario is considering expanding its operations by hiring 2 new instructors and acquiring 2 additional vehicles. The school's owner has projected that the new instructors will generate an additional $80,000 in annual revenue based on an average of 20 lessons per week per instructor at $40 per lesson. The owner estimates the cost of each new vehicle at $30,000 and anticipates a 15% annual increase in insurance premiums for the entire fleet due to the expansion. The current fleet consists of 3 vehicles, and the school's current annual operating expenses, excluding vehicle costs and insurance, are $70,000. If the annual cost of insurance for the current fleet is $12,000, and the annual operating cost per vehicle, fuel, maintenance, depreciation is $5,000. What is the projected net profit for the first year of expansion, assuming all new instructors are fully utilized and all vehicles are operational? Option A. The projected net profit is $25,000. Option B. The projected net profit is $43,000. Option C. The projected net profit is $37,000. Option D. The projected net profit is $31,000. Correct answer is D. The projected net profit is $31,000. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Hereford driver instructor by requiring them to assess the financial viability of a proposed expansion, while adhering to the specific regulations governing driving instruction in Ontario, Canada. The challenge lies in balancing the instructor's personal financial goals with the legal and ethical obligations to provide safe and effective training, ensuring the business remains sustainable without compromising service quality or client safety. Accurate financial forecasting and understanding of relevant provincial regulations are paramount. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves a thorough financial projection that accounts for all anticipated costs, including vehicle acquisition and maintenance, insurance premiums specific to commercial driving instruction in Ontario, instructor salaries, fuel, administrative expenses, and marketing. This projection must also realistically estimate revenue based on anticipated student numbers and lesson fees, considering seasonal fluctuations and local market competition. Crucially, this financial model must be benchmarked against the operational requirements and cost structures mandated by the Ontario Ministry of Transportation, MTO, for licensed driving schools, ensuring compliance with all licensing and safety standards. This detailed, compliant financial planning is correct because it directly addresses the sustainability of the business within the legal framework of Ontario, ensuring that expansion is not undertaken without a clear understanding of its financial feasibility and adherence to MTO regulations. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to base the expansion decision solely on projected revenue from a small number of new instructors, without a detailed breakdown of associated operational costs and regulatory compliance expenses. This fails to account for the significant overheads and specific insurance requirements for commercial driving instruction in Ontario, potentially leading to an unsustainable business model and non-compliance with MTO operational standards. Another incorrect approach would be to prioritize acquiring the maximum number of new vehicles without a corresponding increase in student bookings or a clear plan for their utilization and maintenance. This overlooks the capital expenditure and ongoing operational costs, such as insurance, fuel, and regular servicing, which are critical for maintaining a safe and compliant fleet as per Ontario's vehicle standards for driving schools. A further incorrect approach would be to assume that existing operational costs will remain static despite the expansion. This ignores the increased insurance premiums, potential need for additional administrative staff, and the costs associated with ensuring all new vehicles and instructors meet Ontario's stringent MTO licensing and safety requirements. Such an oversight can lead to significant underestimation of the true cost of expansion. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic, data-driven approach to financial planning for expansion. This involves 1. Identifying all direct and indirect costs associated with the expansion, including regulatory compliance costs specific to Ontario. 2. Developing realistic revenue projections based on market analysis and operational capacity. 3. Creating a comprehensive financial model that incorporates these projections and costs, including sensitivity analysis for key variables. 4. Benchmarking the financial plan against provincial regulatory requirements and industry best practices. 5. Seeking professional financial advice, if necessary, to ensure accuracy and compliance. Question 11. The performance metrics show a significant increase in the failure rate for the Hereford driver's test among individuals attempting the test for the second time, raising concerns about the test's effectiveness and fairness. Considering the regulatory framework of Hereford, which of the following actions is the most appropriate response? Option A. Immediately implement a higher pass threshold for all subsequent attempts of the Hereford driver's test to ensure a more rigorous standard. Option B. Initiate a comprehensive review of the Hereford driver's test content and administration to identify potential areas of confusion or undue difficulty for repeat test takers and consider revisions based on findings. Option C. Advise candidates that a higher failure rate for repeat attempts is expected and encourage them to seek additional private instruction without investigating the test itself. Option D. Disregard the increased failure rate for repeat attempts as a statistical anomaly and continue with the current testing procedures. The correct answer is B. Initiate a comprehensive review of the Hereford driver's test content and administration to identify potential areas of confusion or undue difficulty for repeat test takers and consider revisions based on findings. Explanation. The performance metrics show a concerning trend in the failure rate of the Hereford driver's test, particularly for individuals attempting the test for the second time. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an understanding of the test's purpose, the regulatory framework governing driver licensing in Hereford, and the ethical obligations of the testing authority. The core challenge lies in balancing the need for competent drivers with the efficiency and fairness of the testing process, while adhering strictly to the Hereford Road Traffic Act and its associated regulations. The best approach involves a thorough, data-driven review of the test itself, focusing on potential ambiguities or areas of difficulty that may disproportionately affect repeat test takers. This would involve analyzing the specific sections of the test where failures are concentrated, consulting with experienced examiners for qualitative insights, and potentially reviewing the training materials provided to candidates. Hereford Road Traffic Act mandates that the driving test accurately assesses a candidate's ability to drive safely and competently. Therefore, if the data suggests a systemic issue with the test's design or administration, it is the regulatory responsibility to investigate and rectify it to ensure fairness and effectiveness, aligning with the Act's objective of promoting road safety. An incorrect approach would be to simply increase the pass mark or introduce more stringent, arbitrary criteria for repeat test takers. This would be ethically questionable, as it penalizes individuals without addressing the root cause of their failures, and could be seen as a violation of the principle of a fair and objective assessment, as implied by the Hereford Road Traffic Act's intent. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the performance metrics as anomalies without further investigation. This demonstrates a failure to uphold the duty of care and continuous improvement expected of a licensing authority, potentially leading to the issuance of licenses to individuals who may not be fully prepared, thereby compromising road safety. Furthermore, focusing solely on the individual candidate's perceived lack of effort, without considering potential flaws in the testing instrument, ignores the responsibility of the testing authority to provide a valid and reliable assessment tool. Professionals should employ a systematic decision-making process that begins with acknowledging the data and its implications. This involves forming a hypothesis about the cause of the observed trend, designing an investigation to test that hypothesis, and implementing evidence-based solutions. Ethical considerations, such as fairness, transparency, and the public interest in road safety, must guide every step of this process. Question 12. The audit findings indicate that a Hereford driver's test examiner has recorded a failure for a candidate in the hazard perception section, citing failure to react to a developing hazard. However, the examiner's notes are vague, and the candidate is requesting clarification, stating they believe they had reacted appropriately. The examiner is considering amending the notes to "seemed unsure" to appease the candidate, believing the candidate's overall driving was otherwise good. Considering the Hereford driver's test regulations and syllabus, which of the following actions best reflects professional and regulatory compliance? Option A. The examiner should simply state to the candidate that the system flagged a failure and that the decision is final without providing any further explanation. Option B. The examiner should review the specific video evidence of the candidate's performance during the hazard perception test, cross-referencing it with the precise criteria for identifying and reacting to the specific hazard in question as detailed in the Hereford driver's test syllabus, and provide the candidate with a clear explanation based on this objective evidence. Option C. The examiner should amend the notes to "seemed unsure" and pass the candidate, as the overall driving performance was good and the examiner believes the candidate understood the situation. Option D. The examiner should explain to the candidate that, while they may have perceived their reaction as appropriate, the examiner's subjective judgment is that the reaction was insufficient, and this is why they failed. The correct answer is B. The examiner should review the specific video evidence of the candidate's performance during the hazard perception test, cross-referencing it with the precise criteria for identifying and reacting to the specific hazard in question as detailed in the Hereford driver's test syllabus, and provide the candidate with a clear explanation based on this objective evidence. Explanation. The audit findings indicate a potential lapse in adherence to the Hereford driver's test regulations concerning the assessment of hazard perception. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the examiner to balance the need for consistent and fair assessment with the potential for subjective interpretation of a candidate's responses. The examiner must ensure that their judgment aligns strictly with the established criteria for hazard perception, as outlined in the Hereford driver's test syllabus, to maintain the integrity of the testing process. The best professional practice involves a thorough review of the candidate's performance against the specific hazard perception criteria detailed in the Hereford driver's test syllabus. This approach ensures that the assessment is objective, evidence-based, and directly reflects the candidate's ability to identify and react to developing hazards as defined by the testing authority. This aligns with the regulatory requirement for standardized and fair evaluation, ensuring that all candidates are assessed on the same objective benchmarks. Failing to accurately document the specific reasons for a hazard perception failure, instead relying on a general statement, is a regulatory failure. It prevents a transparent review of the assessment and does not provide the candidate with clear feedback on their specific shortcomings, which is crucial for their learning and future improvement. Similarly, attributing a failure to a perceived lack of confidence without concrete evidence of a failure to identify a hazard is an ethical failure. It introduces subjective bias into the assessment, moving away from the objective criteria mandated by the Hereford driver's test regulations, overriding the system's assessment based on a personal feeling that the candidate seemed to understand, without demonstrable evidence of correct identification and response, is a direct contravention of the established testing protocols and a significant regulatory breach. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to established regulatory guidelines and objective assessment criteria. This involves understanding the specific requirements of the Hereford driver's test syllabus, meticulously documenting all observations against these criteria, and avoiding subjective interpretations or personal biases. When in doubt, seeking clarification from supervisory bodies or referring to detailed guidance within the syllabus is paramount to ensuring fair and compliant assessment. Question 13. The efficiency study reveals that a Hereford driving instructor also owns a vehicle repair shop. During a lesson, the instructor notices a minor engine noise from the learner's car and immediately suggests it needs to be brought to their repair shop for immediate attention, without mentioning their ownership of the shop, which approach best upholds professional and ethical standards for the driving instructor in Hereford. Option A. Transparently disclose ownership of the repair shop to the learner and explain that while they can offer repair services, the learner is free to choose any repair shop. Option B. Proceed with offering repair advice as usual, assuming the learner will seek repairs elsewhere if they choose without any specific disclosure. Option C. Advise the learner to ignore the noise for now, as it is likely minor and not a safety concern, and continue with the driving lesson. Option D. Recommend that the learner immediately bring their car to the instructor's repair shop, emphasizing the urgency of the issue. The correct answer is A. Transparently disclose ownership of the repair shop to the learner and explain that while they can offer repair services, the learner is free to choose any repair shop. Explanation. The efficiency study reveals a potential conflict of interest for a Hereford driver trainer who also operates a vehicle repair shop. This scenario is professionally challenging because the trainer has a vested interest in recommending repairs that might not be strictly necessary, potentially influencing the learner driver's decision-making process and financial well-being. Careful judgment is required to ensure that advice given during training is solely in the best interest of the learner's safety and skill development, not for personal financial gain. The best professional practice involves transparently disclosing the ownership of the repair shop to the learner driver at the outset of their training. This approach ensures that the learner is fully aware of any potential conflict of interest. By disclosing this information, the trainer upholds the ethical principle of honesty and integrity, allowing the learner to make an informed decision about whether to use the trainer's repair services or seek alternatives. This transparency aligns with the general principles of professional conduct expected of driving instructors, which prioritize client welfare and trust. Recommending their own repair shop without disclosure is professionally unacceptable because it exploits the trust placed in the trainer by the learner. This action violates the ethical duty to act in the client's best interest and creates a significant conflict of interest, potentially leading to unnecessary expenses for the learner. Suggesting that the learner must use the repair shop for any perceived issues, even minor ones, is also professionally unacceptable. This coercive behavior undermines the learner's autonomy and demonstrates a clear prioritization of the trainer's financial interests over the learner's needs and budget. It also fails to acknowledge that other reputable repair services exist, ignoring the potential conflict of interest and continuing to offer repair advice as usual, without any disclosure, is professionally unacceptable. This passive approach still allows the conflict to influence the trainer's advice and action, even if unintentionally, and fails to uphold the duty of transparency and ethical conduct. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency, client welfare, and adherence to ethical codes. When a potential conflict of interest arises, the first step is to identify it clearly. The next step is to consider the impact on the client and the professional's duty of care. The most ethical course of action is always to disclose the conflict and allow the client to make an informed choice, or to recuse oneself from situations where the conflict cannot be adequately managed through disclosure. Question 14. Market research demonstrates that some driving instructors in Hereford may feel pressured by students to proceed with a driving test even when their performance indicates they are not yet ready. If a student, after a mock test, expresses significant distress and pleads with their instructor to book the actual test, stating they can't handle another lesson and just need to get it over with, what is the most professionally responsible course of action for the instructor, adhering to the regulations and guidelines set by the Driver and Vehicle Standards Agency, DVSA, in the UK? Option A. Agree to book the test as requested, but subtly coach the student on how to minimize the appearance of their faults during the test, hoping they might pass by chance. Option B. Book the test immediately to relieve the student's immediate stress, and then cancel it if the instructor feels it's absolutely necessary closer to the date. Option C. Tell the student that while they have faults, everyone makes mistakes, and they should just try their best on the test, as the instructor doesn't want to upset them further. Option D. Honestly explain to the student that their current driving exhibits serious faults that would result in failure on the official test, and offer to continue providing instruction to address these specific areas, focusing on developing the necessary skills for safe driving. The correct answer is D. Honestly explain to the student that their current driving exhibits serious faults that would result in failure on the official test, and offer to continue providing instruction to address these specific areas, focusing on developing the necessary skills for safe driving. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Hereford driver instructor due to the inherent conflict between client satisfaction and adherence to regulatory standards. The instructor must balance the desire to help a student pass with the absolute requirement to ensure the student demonstrates safe and competent driving skills as mandated by the Driver and Vehicle Standards Agency, DVSA, in the UK. Failure to do so not only risks the student's safety and the safety of other road users, but also undermines the integrity of the licensing process and the instructor's professional standing. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves the instructor maintaining professional integrity and strictly adhering to the DVSA guidelines for the Hereford driving test. This means providing honest and objective feedback to the student, regardless of their emotional reaction. The instructor must explain that the student's current performance exhibits serious faults that would lead to failure on the official test. They should then offer to continue providing instruction to address these specific faults, focusing on improving the student's skills to meet the required standard for safe driving. This approach is correct because it prioritizes public safety, upholds the regulatory framework set by the DVSA, and maintains the instructor's ethical obligation to provide competent and truthful guidance. The DVSA primary objective is to ensure that only drivers who meet a satisfactory standard of competence and safety are licensed. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves succumbing to the student's emotional pressure and agreeing to proceed with the test despite knowing the student is not ready. This is ethically and regulatorily unsound because it directly violates the instructor's duty of care and the DVSA mandate to assess competence. It risks putting an unsafe driver on the road, potentially leading to accidents and endangering others. This action also constitutes a breach of professional conduct, as it prioritizes a false sense of client satisfaction over genuine safety and regulatory compliance. Another incorrect approach is to agree to coach the student on how to get away with minor errors or to focus solely on passing the test without addressing the underlying skill deficits. This is also a serious ethical and regulatory failure. It undermines the purpose of the driving test, which is to assess a driver's ability to drive safely and competently. This approach is dishonest and manipulative, and it fails to equip the student with the necessary skills for long-term safe driving. It also contravenes the DVSA emphasis on developing a safe driving attitude and understanding. A further incorrect approach would be to dismiss the student's concerns and refuse to acknowledge the severity of their driving faults, perhaps by stating that everyone makes mistakes. While true, this fails to recognize that certain mistakes constitute serious or dangerous faults that are test-fail criteria. This approach is professionally negligent, as it does not provide the student with the clear, actionable feedback they need to improve. It also fails to uphold the instructor's responsibility to accurately assess the student's readiness for the test according to DVSA standards. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety and regulatory compliance above all else. This involves 1. Accurately assessing the situation against established standards, DVSA requirements. 2. Communicating findings clearly and honestly to the client, even if difficult. 3. Offering constructive solutions that align with professional duties and regulatory obligations. 4. Maintaining professional boundaries and resisting undue pressure. 5. Documenting interactions and decisions for accountability. Question 15. The evaluation methodology shows that a candidate taking their driving test in Hereford has demonstrated excellent situational awareness and control throughout the test, but made a minor error in positioning during a Bay Park maneuver, which did not affect other road users. Considering the overall performance and the specific guidelines for the Hereford driver's test, which of the following actions best reflects professional and regulatory compliance? Option A. Fail the candidate for the positioning error, deeming it a critical lapse in spatial judgment that could lead to future issues. Option B. Record the minor positioning error as a minor fault and continue with the test, making the final pass/fail decision based on the total number of faults and the absence of serious or dangerous faults. Option C. Allow the candidate to repeat the Bay Park maneuver until they achieve a perfect execution. Then continue the test. Option D. Pass the candidate immediately, considering the minor positioning error insignificant given their otherwise strong performance and the lack of impact on others. The correct answer is B. Record the minor positioning error as a minor fault and continue with the test, making the final pass/fail decision based on the total number of faults and the absence of serious or dangerous faults. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows that the Hereford driver's test is designed to assess not only the practical driving skills of candidates, but also their understanding of road safety principles and adherence to the highway code, which is governed by UK regulations. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the examiner to balance the need for objective assessment with the potential for subjective interpretation, especially when dealing with minor errors that do not directly compromise safety but deviate from ideal practice. The examiner must also consider the impact of their decision on the candidate's livelihood and the public's safety. The best approach involves a thorough and objective assessment of the candidate's performance against the established criteria of the Hereford driver's test, as outlined in the DVSA, Driver and Vehicle Standards Agency, guidelines. This means meticulously recording all faults, categorizing them correctly, minor, serious, or dangerous, and ensuring that the final decision to pass or fail is based solely on whether the candidate has committed any serious or dangerous faults or accumulated more than 15 minor faults. This approach is correct because it aligns with the regulatory framework designed to ensure that only competent and safe drivers are licensed, thereby protecting public safety and maintaining the integrity of the licensing system. It adheres to the principle of fairness by applying consistent standards to all candidates. An incorrect approach would be to pass a candidate who has committed a serious fault, such as failing to stop at a junction, on the grounds that they seemed like a good driver overall, or that the examiner felt sympathetic to their situation. This is ethically and regulatorily unacceptable, as it directly violates the DVSA clear guidelines on fault assessment and compromises public safety by licensing an individual who has demonstrated a significant lack of competence. Another incorrect approach would be to fail a candidate for a minor deviation, such as being slightly off-center when parking, if it did not impede other road users or pose any risk. This is professionally unacceptable because it demonstrates a failure to apply the test criteria accurately and fairly. It can lead to unnecessary stress for the candidate and undermines the credibility of the testing process. A further incorrect approach would be to allow a candidate to practice a maneuver repeatedly during the test until they get it right, even if they initially made a minor fault. This is not a valid testing method and is contrary to the principles of objective assessment. The test is designed to evaluate a candidate's ability to perform under normal test conditions, not to provide remedial training. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes objective adherence to established testing criteria and regulatory guidelines. This involves a clear understanding of the fault grading system, consistent application of these standards, and a commitment to public safety above all else. When faced with ambiguity, examiners should refer to their training and the official guidance provided by the DVSA, and if necessary, seek clarification from supervisors. The focus must always be on whether the candidate has met the required standard for safe driving, as defined by the regulations. Question 16. Stakeholder feedback indicates that some clients in the UK are requesting to liquidate their existing pension funds to invest in high-risk, speculative ventures, potentially jeopardizing their long-term retirement security. As a financial advisor regulated by the FCA and adhering to SISI guidelines, how should you best address a client who expresses this desire, citing a recent surge in a particular cryptocurrency? Option A. Proceed with the liquidation and investment as requested by the client, emphasizing the potential for high returns and downplaying the associated risks to maintain client satisfaction. Option B. Clearly explain the risks associated with early pension withdrawal, including potential tax implications and loss of retirement benefits, and discuss alternative investment strategies that align with their long-term retirement goals while acknowledging their interest in growth opportunities. Option C. Advise the client that, while you cannot directly recommend such a volatile investment, you can facilitate the withdrawal and investment process if they insist, as it is their money. Option D. Suggest the client speak with a different advisor who might be more comfortable with speculative investments, as your firm's policy is to avoid such high-risk recommendations. The correct answer is B. Clearly explain the risks associated with early pension withdrawal, including potential tax implications and loss of retirement benefits, and discuss alternative investment strategies that align with their long-term retirement goals while acknowledging their interest in growth opportunities. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate needs of a customer with the regulatory obligations of a financial advisor. The advisor must avoid making recommendations that could be detrimental to the client's long-term financial well-being, even if the client expresses a strong immediate desire. The pressure to secure a sale or retain a client can create a conflict of interest if not managed ethically and in accordance with regulatory requirements. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves clearly explaining the risks and potential consequences of the client's proposed investment strategy, particularly concerning the impact on their retirement goals and the potential for early withdrawal penalties. This approach aligns with the FCA's principles for businesses, specifically Principle 2, Customers' Interests, and Principle 3, Fitness and Propriety, which mandate acting with due skill, care, and diligence, and acting in the best interests of the customer. It also adheres to the SISI Code of Conduct, which emphasizes providing suitable advice and ensuring clients understand the implications of their financial decisions. By educating the client and offering alternative, more suitable solutions, the advisor upholds their fiduciary duty and regulatory obligations. Incorrect approaches analysis. Recommending the client proceed with the withdrawal and investment without a thorough discussion of the risks and alternatives fails to act in the client's best interests and could lead to unsuitable advice, violating FCA Principle 2. Suggesting the client seek advice from another professional solely to facilitate the transaction avoids responsibility and does not fulfill the advisor's duty to provide appropriate guidance, potentially breaching SISI ethical standards. Agreeing to the client's request without any further discussion or explanation of consequences ignores the advisor's professional responsibility to ensure the client makes informed decisions, and could be seen as facilitating a potentially harmful financial action, contravening regulatory expectations for suitability. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes client welfare and regulatory compliance. This involves actively listening to the client's needs and concerns, thoroughly assessing their financial situation and objectives, and providing clear, understandable advice that considers all potential risks and benefits. When a client's request appears to conflict with their stated goals or regulatory guidelines, the professional must engage in a detailed discussion, explain the implications, and propose suitable alternatives, rather than simply acquiescing or deferring responsibility. Question 17. The assessment process reveals that a newly licensed Hereford driver has successfully completed their practical driving test in England. What is the most accurate and professionally responsible guidance to provide regarding their immediate driving privileges and responsibilities? Option A. Advise them that they are now fully qualified to drive anywhere without any further restrictions or conditions attached to their license. Option B. State that their license is unconditional and they are now a fully qualified driver with no further legal obligations beyond general road traffic laws. Option C suggests that they should primarily focus on driving safely and that the legal specifics of their new driver status are not a primary concern at this stage. Option D. Inform them that their full driving license is subject to a probationary period of 2 years, during which accumulating 6 or more penalty points will result in license revocation and the requirement to retake both the theory and practical tests. The correct answer is D. Inform them that their full driving license is subject to a probationary period of 2 years, during which accumulating 6 or more penalty points will result in license revocation and the requirement to retake both the theory and practical tests. Explanation: the assessment process reveals a scenario where a Hereford driver, having recently passed their practical driving test in England, seeking to understand the immediate implications for their driving privileges. This situation is professionally challenging because while passing the test grants the right to drive, it is not the absolute end of the regulatory process. The driver must be aware of ongoing responsibilities and potential conditions attached to their license. Careful judgment is required to ensure the driver understands their obligations beyond the test itself, particularly concerning the probationary period for new drivers in England. The best professional practice involves clearly informing the driver that passing the practical test in England is a prerequisite for obtaining a full driving license, but that the license is subject to a probationary period. During this period, specific rules apply, most notably the requirement to avoid accumulating 6 or more penalty points within the first 2 years of holding the license. Failure to adhere to this can result in the revocation of the license and the need to retake both the theory and practical tests. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the Road Traffic, New Drivers, Act 1995, which governs the probationary period for new drivers in England. It provides essential, actionable information that protects the driver from inadvertently breaching regulations. An incorrect approach would be to simply state that the driver can now drive anywhere without further qualification. This is professionally unacceptable, as it omits crucial information about the probationary period and the risk of license revocation, potentially leading the driver into regulatory breaches. Another incorrect approach would be to advise the driver that their license is unconditional and they are now fully qualified with no further restrictions. This is also professionally unacceptable because it ignores the specific legislative framework in place for new drivers in England, failing to educate them on vital compliance requirements. A third incorrect approach would be to suggest that the driver should only focus on driving safely and that the legal specifics of the probationary period are not their immediate concern. This is professionally unacceptable, as it abdicates the responsibility to inform the driver of their legal obligations, which are directly tied to their continued ability to drive. Professionals should use a decision-making framework that prioritizes clear, accurate, and legally compliant information dissemination. This involves understanding the specific regulatory environment, in this case, England's new driver regulations, identifying potential pitfalls for the client, and providing proactive guidance to mitigate risks. The focus should always be on empowering the client with the knowledge to remain compliant and avoid negative consequences. Question 18. Analysis of a driver's conduct during a Hereford driving test. What is the most appropriate response when faced with a perceived opportunity to shorten the designated route by turning down an unmarked residential street and simultaneously observing a red traffic light ahead? Option A. Proceed through the red traffic light to avoid delaying the test. Option B. Turn down the unmarked residential street to save time, assuming it is a safe shortcut. Option C. Continue on the designated route and stop at the red traffic light, waiting for it to turn green before proceeding. Option D. Turn down the unmarked residential street and then attempt to rejoin the test route, even if it means crossing a pedestrian crossing against a red light. The correct answer is C. Continue on the designated route and stop at the red traffic light, waiting for it to turn green before proceeding. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a driver to balance immediate personal convenience with adherence to traffic laws and the safety of others. The temptation to take a shortcut, even if seemingly minor, can lead to dangerous situations and regulatory breaches. Careful judgment is required to prioritize safety and compliance over expediency. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves strictly adhering to the designated route and traffic signals. This approach prioritizes safety, legal compliance, and the integrity of the driving test. The Hereford driving test regulations, like all responsible driving assessments, are designed to ensure drivers operate vehicles safely and lawfully. Following the prescribed route and obeying all traffic signals are fundamental requirements for demonstrating competence and responsible road usage. This approach directly aligns with the objective of the test, to certify that a driver can operate a vehicle safely and in accordance with the laws of England. Incorrect approaches analysis, taking a shortcut through a residential area, even if it appears to save time, is a failure to follow the test route and demonstrates a disregard for established procedures. This action could also lead to unexpected hazards, such as children playing or parked cars, which the driver may not be prepared to navigate safely within the context of a test. Furthermore, it shows a lack of respect for the testing process and its objectives. Ignoring a red traffic light is a severe regulatory failure. It directly contravenes the highway code and demonstrates a dangerous lack of judgment and a willingness to endanger oneself and others. This is an immediate and disqualifying offense in any driving test. Proceeding through a pedestrian crossing when the light is red is also a critical failure. It shows a complete disregard for pedestrian safety and traffic regulations, putting vulnerable road users at significant risk. This action is not only illegal but also ethically reprehensible. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing similar situations should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety, legality, and adherence to established protocols. This involves understanding the underlying principles of the regulations and the ethical responsibilities associated with the role. When faced with a choice between convenience and compliance, the professional must always opt for compliance and safety. This requires a conscious effort to resist immediate gratification and to consider the potential consequences of any deviation from the rules. In the context of a driving test, this means understanding that the test is not merely about reaching a destination, but about demonstrating safe and lawful driving practices throughout the entire assessment. Question 19. The review process indicates that a financial advisor registered in Ontario, Canada, has recommended a private equity investment to a client. Subsequent investigation reveals that the advisor's spouse is a significant shareholder in the private company being recommended. What is the most appropriate course of action for the advisor in this situation? Option A. Make the investment recommendation and disclose the spouse's ownership stake to the client only after the investment has been completed. Option B. Immediately provide the client with full written disclosure of the advisor's spouse's ownership stake in the private company and the potential conflict of interest, allowing the client to make an informed decision. Option C. Proceed with the investment recommendation, assuming the investment is in the client's best interest and the spouse's ownership is not material to the recommendation. Option D. Verbally inform the client about the spouse's ownership stake in the private company before proceeding with the investment. Correct answer is B. Immediately provide the client with full written disclosure of the advisor's spouse's ownership stake in the private company and the potential conflict of interest, allowing the client to make an informed decision. Explanation. The review process indicates a potential conflict of interest scenario involving a financial advisor in Ontario, Canada, and their client's investment in a private company where the advisor's spouse holds a significant equity stake. This situation is professionally challenging because it requires the advisor to navigate complex ethical obligations and regulatory requirements under Ontario securities law and the advisor's firm's policies, balancing their duty to act in the client's best interest with personal financial ties. Careful judgment is required to ensure transparency, avoid undue influence, and maintain client trust. The best professional practice involves immediately disclosing the relationship and potential conflict to the client in writing. This approach is correct because it aligns with the fundamental ethical principle of putting the client's interests first and adheres to regulatory requirements in Ontario that mandate disclosure of conflicts of interest. Specifically, under Ontario securities law and the rules of the Mutual Fund Dealers Association of Canada, MFDA, or Investment Industry Regulatory Organization of Canada, IIROC. Depending on the advisor's registration, advisors have a duty to disclose any material facts, including relationships that could reasonably be expected to affect their judgment or the client's decision. This proactive disclosure allows the client to make an informed decision about whether to proceed with the investment, knowing the advisor's personal connection. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the investment without any disclosure, assuming the investment is sound and the client's best interest is being served. This fails to meet the regulatory obligation for disclosure of conflicts of interest and breaches the ethical duty of transparency. Another incorrect approach would be to only verbally disclose the relationship to the client. While better than no disclosure, it lacks the required documentation and can be easily forgotten or misunderstood, failing to provide the client with a clear written record of the conflict and the advisor's recommendation. Finally, advising the client to invest without disclosing the conflict, but then later disclosing it after the investment is made, is also professionally unacceptable. This constitutes a failure to disclose at the point where it could influence the client's decision-making process and undermines trust. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes client interests and regulatory compliance. This involves identifying potential conflicts, assessing their materiality, and implementing appropriate disclosure and mitigation strategies. When a conflict arises, the immediate step should be to consult relevant firm policies and regulatory guidelines, followed by clear written communication to the client, allowing them to make an informed choice. Question 20. Performance analysis shows that following the implementation of a new traffic management scheme in Hereford, the average pass rate for the Hereford driver's test has fluctuated. To objectively assess the scheme's impact, what is the most appropriate method to quantify its effectiveness? Option A. Compare the pass rates for the Hereford driver's test from the year before the scheme's implementation to the year after, without analyzing specific error categories or considering other potential influencing factors. Option B. Gather informal feedback from all Hereford driving instructors regarding their perceived impact of the new traffic management scheme on learner performance and pass rates. Option C. Calculate the percentage change in the overall pass rate for the Hereford driver's test from the 6 months prior to the scheme's implementation to the 6 months after, and conduct a statistical test, e.g., a z-test for proportions, to determine if the observed change is statistically significant, while also analyzing the frequency of specific error types recorded during tests before and after the scheme. Option D. Focus solely on the number of learners who passed the Hereford driver's test in the month immediately following the scheme's implementation, assuming this represents the scheme's immediate positive effect. The correct answer is C. Calculate the percentage change in the overall pass rate for the Hereford driver's test from the 6 months prior to the scheme's implementation to the 6 months after, and conduct a statistical test, e.g., a z-test for proportions, to determine if the observed change is statistically significant, while also analyzing the frequency of specific error types recorded during tests before and after the scheme. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Hereford driver instructor by requiring them to assess the impact of a new traffic management scheme on learner-driver performance and pass rates. The challenge lies in quantifying the effectiveness of the scheme and its direct correlation to driver training outcomes, necessitating a data-driven approach that goes beyond anecdotal evidence. Accurate impact assessment is crucial for justifying training modifications, resource allocation, and ultimately, for ensuring learner drivers are adequately prepared for the real-world driving environment in Hereford. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a systematic, data-driven impact assessment. This approach meticulously collects and analyzes pre-scheme and post-scheme pass rates, alongside specific error types recorded during practical tests. By calculating the percentage change in overall pass rates and the statistical significance of changes in error frequencies, e.g., using a t-test or chi-squared test for proportions, the instructor can objectively measure the scheme's influence. For example, if the average pass rate in Hereford increased from 55% to 62% after the scheme's implementation, and a statistical analysis confirms this increase is unlikely due to random chance, it provides strong evidence of a positive impact. This aligns with the ethical obligation to provide effective training and the professional responsibility to adapt to changes in the driving environment. The Hereford driving test regulations implicitly require instructors to prepare candidates for current road conditions and regulations. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves relying solely on anecdotal feedback from instructors and learners. While qualitative data can offer insights, it lacks the objectivity and statistical rigor to definitively prove the scheme's impact. This approach risks making decisions based on subjective opinions rather than empirical evidence, potentially leading to misallocation of training resources or failure to identify genuine issues. It bypasses the need for quantifiable evidence required for a robust impact assessment. Another incorrect approach is to focus only on the overall pass rate without analyzing specific error types. While an increase in pass rates might be observed, it doesn't explain why the pass rate changed. Without analyzing error data, e.g., a decrease in errors related to lane discipline or junction negotiation, the instructor cannot pinpoint which aspects of the new scheme are beneficial or detrimental to learner drivers. This superficial analysis fails to provide actionable insights for refining training strategies. A third incorrect approach is to assume the new scheme is solely responsible for any observed changes in pass rates, without considering confounding factors. For instance, changes in examiner strictness, seasonal weather patterns, or even broader economic factors influencing learner motivation could also affect pass rates. This approach fails to isolate the impact of the traffic management scheme, leading to potentially flawed conclusions about its effectiveness. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured, evidence-based approach to impact assessment. This involves defining clear objectives, identifying relevant metrics, quantitative and qualitative, establishing a baseline, collecting data systematically, employing appropriate analytical techniques, and interpreting results cautiously, considering potential confounding variables. In the context of the Hereford driving test, this means moving beyond subjective observations to rigorous data analysis that can inform training adjustments and demonstrate the effectiveness of instructional methods in the evolving road network.